Thank you, Susan, and thank you all for joining us on this freezing cold night. And what could be a better antidote to that than this extraordinary exhibition? What we're going to do is we're going to speak about individual works and link them to some of the themes in Beatrice's practice. And we're going to, of course, start upstairs. Beatrice, you take us through a shimmering, light-drenched environment that could be a walk in a tropical forest or a swim in a lagoon. The title of your installation is Além de Horizonte, which translates as Beyond the Horizon. And looking up, we see 10 suns, which could be rising or setting above the horizon. You live and work in Rio. Could you tell us what role that landscape, that environment plays in your work?
Well, so thank you, Iwona. Thank you, Susan. So thank you all for coming here. Yes. So I think the Rio de Janeiro, where I was born, when I live and still work and live, so has been playing a big role in my entire work since the beginning. I think it's very much about the context, the incredible number of contrasts that you could see. You have real nature because we have forests, oceans. It's not just gardens, so the real nature in contrast with different urban situation, which goes to different social situation too as well. So Rio, I would say, is a very strong place that shows contrast in every single corner. Also with the popular manifestations, and also like the religious parties that you can see in the countryside of Rio. So the whole context of the city make me feel, think differently, I think, and influenced a lot my work.
This is very different from Sao Paulo, which is much more industrialized and inland. And I guess the sense of water that we feel up there, the way that light filters through, as if you're underwater or you're in a sun-drenched tropical forest. I think it's a very palpable experience of the very, very unique landscape of Rio. Obviously, it's an immersive environment at a huge scale. How does that relate to other public art commissions that you've done? You started in Manchester.
Yeah, I think it's something that I never expected, that I would be involved. I always been a painter, and I always manage it by dimensional. So I'm an artist that think about the bidimensional things. It's not exactly leading with three-dimensional. So when the first invitation came along, it was a project in Manchester for the Selfridge department store there, and it was about a more big program about Brazil. And then Adriano Pedrosa, who was the curator of that artistic part of this project, he invited me to do a project for the facade of the Selfridge department store in Manchester. And the first thought I had, it was like, oh no, I don't know, I don't think so. I'm able to do it. And then at the same time, the challenge of being in a public space. It was something that I really thought like it would be something interesting. And then I decided to say yes. And from that point, it was like working on an architectural plan. So making my drawings, because I draw with my hands. And then, so that became something really interesting in how people think like you don't draw anymore with your hands, but that it was something that to manage, to keep my language, to keep my interests and my thoughts on the bidimensional things, at the same time work on an architectural plan where I needed to make the composition happen in a completely different way. The other thing, it was like when you do a project like that, it was not just about you, the artist, or your language. It's about a collaboration. when the building, the architect that has developed the building, why the building was developed for what exactly, and also like the technicians that would make it happen, so would translate your drawing to a real the existing place. So altogether was a really fantastic experience, and maybe the most motivation I have to continue to work with this kind of a thing was the fact of communicating with the people, to take my art to a place that people are not really expecting to have it. And this kind of a communication with a completely broad audience was something that really motivated me to continue. But the fact is, it was very successful, in terms of also the observation from curators from the art field of the international art field. So I started being invited to do other projects, thinking about some existing architectural project or work with architects, directly.
You've also created stage sets, in particular for your sister Marcia Milhazes' dance company. Do you consider the body of the viewer, because these are not figurative, but somehow they feel like the body is implicated? Do you think about the dancer or the carnival goer or us as viewers when you're making your work?
Yes, so I think like maybe later we'll talk a little bit more for it, but I think Paulo Reckenhoff, which is a Brazilian critic of art, very important art theoric from Brazil. He wrote a long time ago about my work and the relations with a kind of a hidden body in the structures that I was developing in abstraction that had a communication with like some concretivism, at the same time geometry, organic shapes that were more or less based in portrait, and so yes, so the written, and then we have Carnival. Always has been a kind of a motivation for my work in terms of observing I want to say like the parade of Carnival in Rio de Janeiro, what is something really beyond something, and have like a strong development of freedom to develop their teams, freedom to use color, freedom to develop their costumes. And that strength and that energy, almost wide sometimes, I would to take it to my work. And then like link it with the modernism, the Brazilian modernism, Brazilian modernism and European modernism, that I was very important to continue with that thought. So to my sister dance companies is a contemporary dance company. So it's a completely different skill than this popular manifestation. But I do the sets for her since the beginning of her company in the 90s. And so in a different way, it's almost conceptual kind of communications. But of course, dance has been in the body action, the body movements and the body, psychological kind of, work in the space has been kind of influence in my work, yeah.
And in fact, if we may, we're going to leave Rio just for a moment and go to Japan. And there's an amazing painting upstairs, actually, which is called A Locum Goddess of the Sea. And it has a number of circular arcs with radiating lines. And you can suddenly sense that behind them, there is a hidden figure. Tell us about the inspiration for that work.
Yes, I think the Japanese art, the century, influence a lot the modernism. I think that is when I start my observation to the Japanese art is through the landscapes, the vertical kind of a construction that the modern art has been taking some information to move on. So I also like the pop culture of Japan, and talking about like some curators and critics, like especially Yuko Hasegawa, who has been one of the biggest support of my work in all that thing, and also like public art projects that I did in Japan, including like working with Kazuyo Sejima Fonsana, one of the Pulitzer Prize in the world. So just put this, okay, and then move back to my work and to the work here. So I've been observing like Okusai, like linked the observation of textiles and fabrics from different cultures and worlds, and even from Brazilian indigenous and different kind of a work. Artists, so Japanese was one of those. For this specific group of paintings, I think the kimonos, and not just about the textiles and the pattern that you could find in the Japanese textiles, but also the kimonos and the way they portrayed, Okusai in his woodcut works, principally. They had the way they constructed the volume, like with very rigid cuts and kind of they hidden, they construct a kind of a movement that is based on a very rigid kind of constructions of shapes and forms, and that really it was an important thing for this exhibition here. Yeah.
When you go upstairs, have another look at it, and you also see the presence of fans and the way that the women would dance using those fans in a circular motion. So the body becomes a sort of kinetic, geometric rhythm of ritualized movement.
Yeah. I think the painting upstairs and this one, the other one that is here, the upstairs has this kind of a fan and also a kind of a figure that moves on the surface of the paintings, and have a kind of a background that is basically on a kind of a violet, blue, and greens that constructs a kind of a background to this movement that goes from the top to the bottom and from the bottom to the top, constructs a kind of an image and basically like a kind of a geometry, when actually is when the diagonal were like cut. For a long time, it has been very difficult for me to introduce the diagonal cut on a composition. So the circle has been the most important, like a kind of geometric shape that I've been using. But then the diagonal in these assume here a kind of a construction of based on cuts that also could be concealing a body. Yeah.
I'm going to ask now that you swivel around and look at this painting behind you, which is called The Botanical Mind. And when we see that, we're reminded that Beatrice's studio is right next to the botanical gardens, and we can see in that amazing shapes which are reminiscence of leaves, fronds, flowers, seeds, pods, and petals. So you've got this wonderfully articulated, what you've described as the botanical mind. And yet the colours are flat, they're not naturalistic, they're not modulated to show light and shade. So my question is, are these forms for you symbolic of, for example, growth or fertility, or are they related to the history of ornamentation in the decorative arts and in architecture?
I think it's all together.
All true.
That's my problem. I make so many things. No, but I think, I don't know, I think it may be a good thing that I could add to your observation is the relationship of my language with nature, what has been in different kind of situations. So it starts in Rio, and all my context, what I grew up, and And the second thing is not really observation, the nature in itself. So I'm talking about the feeling of being in the nature. And at the same time, like the observation, the nature shapes or forms or things through actually the applied art, through like some indigenous body work or textiles or all the possibilities that applied art has been playing a big role. So I was looking for this towards so humans' representation of nature, so has been strong. So the observation directly to nature in terms of looking for colors combination, for shapes, it comes in my work later on. So the other thing that is important about nature is like my process, my practice in the studio and my creative process. It has a kind of a scientific a kind of a process because in general I introduce new elements in the existing one that could generate different a movement, a chain reaction that after sometimes long periods, sometimes short periods, will show a different situation. It actually, exactly when I mentioned the diagonal cut, so it started like some years ago, or few years ago, and then it now you can see it, in a more representing something or construction, some new possibilities in terms of the compositions. And this is more or less how nature could renew themselves, It's a kind of change the form, There's a kind of how they could renew based on new or changes on the method, on changes of new things that arrives, and then that could be renewed. So I think that is how my work interferes with that has the nature relation. And in the end is a kind of the human beings that are in the center of my interests in general.
I suppose also we should talk about art historical precedents and that tension between naturalism and geometric abstraction is a legacy, I guess, of Brazilian Tropicalia and the neo-concretist movement. In 1928, you'll know this, the poet Oswaldo de Andrade took inspiration from a painting by Tarsila do Amaral to write the famous Cannibal Manifesto, where he urges Brazilians to become the primitive natives of European prejudice and eat European modernism so as to transform it into something uniquely South American. Can you say something about those legacies for your work?
Yeah, I think definitely I am taking that was my, since I was studying art and Collages in Rio de Janeiro. So my mother was an art historian teacher, so I had all this information at home. Even I grew up, I am in the generation that grew up in a kind of a dry moment because it was during the dictatorship in Brazil. So we have a very dry cultural kind of situation. But at home, I had a different, my parents always tried to make our life normal. And so, and they were very intellectual. And of course, again, it's the dictatorship. So, and then so the modernism connection starts there. So when I finally have my studio and start really developing my own language, I have all these sequence of things like the Brazilian modernism and how to look, not just about the cultural, the Brazilian culture that we have behind, and also something that is important, like especially for my generation, I think we always felt very inferior to other cultures, And my generation had it more stronger, exactly because all this time that we passed through. So I never really felt inferior because that my culture was inferior also, again, because of that. My parents always, they felt very proud about being Brazilian. And so that also took me to the Brazilian modernism, but at the same time, that how to look to our culture and try to take it to, of course, to all the developments about painting in the way I always wanted to be a painter, to the European developments, no, because it was not us in Brazil that organized this kind of thing or developed this thing, but how we could look to our things, our history, which also is important, and also we have developed some very fresh and new things, and put together with the European one. So Tropicalia, the music, Tropicalia, and I would say also Bossa Nova, in totally different ways. Tropicalia was about it too, no? That it was bringing from the legacy of the modernism and bringing it to the music styles as a statement. So I feel totally connected too with this movement that happened in the 70s. And then Bossa Nova is different, a little earlier, but they were about how you could enjoy the life and exactly the nature. Especially it was a movement that happens in Rio de Janeiro. No, it was starting Rio, of course, became national thing, but it just was like more about a walk along the beach, you know, and how you could enjoy it and enjoy life in the end, you know?
I remember you saying that you came across the paintings of Matisse, but only as a reproduction. You couldn't actually, see the real thing.
Until is
And more recently, I know that you were interested in the work of our own pioneer of op art, Bridget Riley. How did these European painters affect your work?
Yes, so Matisse was and continues to be, I think a big reference, always a big motivation at least, And exactly. And Matisse was interesting just when I was I finally opened my first studio in next to Jardim Botânico. And then I was trying to think as Matisse, thinking about also Tarsila do Amaral, thinking about Oswald de Andrade. And at the same time, I thought, how can I think about Matisse, like Matisse, like an European here with this heater, with this tropical environment, with all these contexts that, of course, would be how I could thinking like them. And then I realized that that would not but be possible, that I needed to find a different way of developing the things, And so, but in different ways, to construct European art and also American art, When you look to Frank Stella, exactly how to think about bidimensional, three-dimensional, and the art, that you have the Bridget Riley. It was a big influence too, exactly in the way I wanted to. That's my composition. Sometimes I think they have this kind of it could be claustrophobic, Mm-hmm. It could be very intense visually, and also how could actually the installation upstairs is it's about optical thing too, the experience, like in this kind of transcendental kind of possibility. And so it's very much connected with the optical art developing the master figure of Bridget Riley. Yeah.
One of the great things about doing a talk here surrounded by these works of art is we can actually point to them. And I thought we'd look at this one behind us called Swirling Waters. You've described the process of painting as being like a mathematical dream, that you're working out the elements of an equation across the surface of the canvas. So this is like a kind of laboratory, I suppose. You can see all these competing movements here. So here, there's spirals which turn in on themselves, but here you've got these radiating lines which could go out and into infinity. So could you tell us something about how you compose an incredible work like this?
Yeah, this painting is actually something that is, I don't know, I needed to have some courage to make it, because first I assumed the horizontal line and a kind of a landscape, but actually everything happened like under the ocean sometimes. So I think it's like it could be earth, but it's more about like some flotation and some like a movement that is under something. No, it's not exactly on the same plan. No. And these and has this possibility of take you also to some transcendental kind of situation, what links with the possibility of the experience on the installation upstairs. So so these nucleus of things happens inside, the content that in these areas, and at the same time moving in different direction and maybe going somewhere beyond the horizon.
Yeah. But also there are the rippling lines, the wave effect, which is rhythmic and patterned and continued. And then it comes up against diagonals, solids, the perfect circle, which is impenetrable. So it's almost like you're putting together all these colliding elements, which are partly harmonic and partly very, very disruptive and disjointed. It's an incredible thing to contain all this energy, which is bursting out of this canvas.
It's good, yes. I think the title that my exhibition at the Guggenheim, I had the solo show this year at the Guggenheim in New York, and so it's like the title of the show was Rigid, Regal, and Beauty. I think this is, I don't know, I can see like how I invented a kind of a mathematical system which is connected with abstraction and constructivism at the same time, because when you have your interests in things, you have all artists, you develop based on certain things, but I am very much a studio artist, so for me it's very, very important. That's why I kept staying in Brazil and in Rio specifically, where I always have been, because for me it's very important to understand where is my studio, my space, my things, my home finally. And so this is what should happen will happen in this space. And so every intention you have, everything you planned, ever look into the history and go beyond, it needs to also be condensed in the painting result. So if it doesn't really have a system that's based on a painting development, it will never work out. So it's like that is what I think is the big question, how to make, and probably actually something you said many years ago, that is like the geometry organized my imagination, and I think that is a good way, to say something that makes things happen. Yeah.
One of the other kind of precedents, I suppose, for us in 20th century art history is Russian constructivism. But if you think about that, they loved a diagonal. And it was all about shooting off into outer space or into the future. So it was directional, but it was always about tomorrow. It was utopian. One of the things that is interesting about your work is that it's not about the future. It's resolutely about the here and now. And I wondered if you could say something about your concept of time, because there's an absolute presentness in this. This isn't about taking us off to a utopian tomorrow.
I think time is a question for everybody right now. No, it's the big question, and it's the big variable you could see. But definitely for the artist, time is really, really important. So it is really important that you understand your time. It's not that all artists at the same time, but of course it's very important that you understand what it is. It's your own time. And for me, definitely the paintings, why I start also working with other mediums. it was exactly because the paintings require a kind of a time that it gets longer and longer. Many people think, oh, now you are very successful, you don't need to care about what this. It's easy for you to do. No, it's getting more and more difficult. If you are really engaged with what you do, it's getting worse as life. No, you needed to introduce new motivations. You needed to really push it, move on successfully or positively. And so this is a big challenge. And so it's like painting, I need to stop painting, and sometimes for a long while. So I'm lucky that I had other mediums. Then it started with the screen prints in 96, that I started working with screen prints. And then always the set design I do for my sister dance, contemporary dance company, that also motivated and took me to a different thinking about my work. And then the sculpture that comes later, and very few, is still something that's very punctuate. And the collages, the cutouts on the paper, we have some here too. And this is a kind of a continuous to think about my work, to think about my language, and at the same time, give some brief to the paint. Brief? Yeah. So to the paintings. And go back to it when it's really that the time to go back to it. And of course, each medium has its own time. No? And then they started talking with one another, and exchange. Sometimes the collages could become like a kind of a laboratory for me to go back to the painting. And at the same time, the installations too, start to bring new things to, new possibilities of feelings, of interest, of motivation. So they communicated to one another, they informed things one another, and that is, I feel lucky that I have this possibility.
And in fact, the next work we're going to talk about, which is right over there, which is called Happy Dreams, you do get a real sense of two very different kinds of techniques. Because you'll see these circular motifs, and then in the corner, there are these rectangular forms. I wondered if you could just say something about your technique.
Yeah.
How you put the color on the canvas, and the difference between that and the drawn elements.
So until the pandemic, my process, my creative process were very much based in process. Even it's very like controlled and organized. It's like it was based on a process that I would place an image and then build up things about from that point. And sometimes, after a while, you introduce the new things in the real and actually scale. Since my beginning, I work with big size, big formats. So I think I always had this. So in '89, I worked with cutouts of fabrics and things glued on canvas during the '80s, and then in '89, that became super limited because I want to work more with the paint. And then I want to develop my own motifs and my own elements to the things. Also about the colors, I want to explore it much more than than being limited for industrial kind of a thing. And so I decided I stop, and based on a kind of a very simple kind of a monotype print, I discovered this technique that is based on having it's monotype is a technique that is like it's based on wet paint. So you glue it, the material, in my case a plastic sheet. So you would glue it to somewhere when the paint is still wet. In my case, I figured out that the paint that was dry It was already dried, so I could transfer it afterwards. So gluing it on the canvas and then peel off the plastic and the image would stay. So I know it's complicated, don't think like yeah, I just suggest if someone is interested in really like the Guggenheim, the Guggenheim this year, one of the things that was centered in my exhibition was exactly my technique. And so they know better than me about the technique now. Yeah, so if you have interest, you can go to the website of them, so you would see a big explanation. So, but this was a very important door that opens to my work, to my practice, because I could make my own design, my own shape, my own forms. I could explore the color, the color tonalities, hues, and I could explore the shapes, the composition. So and only work with prints, and only work with paints. And one thing that is also very interesting that was like I could work with the concept of collages. What is always follow my work. And then the idea of having all the motifs and all the areas separate from the whole thing. And so what happened during the pandemic, with the lockdown and thing, was of course a terrible time for everybody. But at the same time, I got some gifts from this time because I look at the studio. Studio was closed. I moved to my apartment, and I never work at home, never in my life. And for the first time, I brought all the drawings kind of materials to home. And I had some unfinished painting on the wall that I was preparing for the Long Museum show in Shanghai. And so I took pictures of these paintings, unfinished paintings. And then at home, I try over the images, over these printed images. I was trying to resolve the composition with use pencils and pens and things. And then I was able to. So at one point I finished, and I thought, oh, I think it's okay. So when I came back to the studio, I tried to just translate this sketch to the actual painting, and work. And so they said, yes, that is interesting. So I introduced from that moment a new method that actually all the paintings here are based on this new method of making preparatory drawings and sketches for the paintings. This is a very irregular thing about paintings in general, but I never did it before. And so for me, it's open up a new. It's always good to introduce new methods. It's not that I'm not working with the one before, but was a new possibility. Really introduce new challenges about the color palette, about the shapes, about the compositions, and also because when you make drawings, is a kind of intimacy that you have with the paper, it's you and the paper and the materials, and there is a different kind of freedom, because freedom is something that actually Ivo Mesquita, another Brazilian important curator, he said once that the most Brazilian thing that I have in my art is have the freedom to really elaborate. So this is interesting because these methods add one more possibility of freedom.
One of the things about the corner of that painting is it's very architectural. It looks like a spatial reference. It's rectangles, squares, as if you're looking at a plan from above. And I just wondered if that kind of juxtaposition of organic, geometric, and architectural is also maybe reflecting this conflict, in a way, between nature and urbanity and industrialization and concrete and all of these kind of competing forces in the life of a city.
Yeah, I think it is the energy that we have in the city, that is a combination of a kind of attention that is like, and that also sometimes it's conflict at the same time, is a kind of, it could be good conflicts, no, and it could be terrible conflicts. So it's always this kind of trying to balance and things that would, being, I think it's about tension, and I remember about color, like when I read the first time, like Yves Klein, when he wrote about the monochromes, he said, I only can work with one solid color at once, because otherwise I will start a conflict that there is no end for this. It's endless. And so, and then I said, that is what I wanted to, it's more about developing a new word, that the conflict is part of it. And at the same time, I hope a good conflict, and have some harmonic kind of result.
Because inevitably we think also about the architecture of affluence and the architecture of poverty. And, the fact that some of your surfaces are distressed, that you do get this duality, I think, in them. We're going to finish with just a brief discussion about the collages, which are all here. And what is interesting is that the kind of materials that you've picked up, which can range from sweet wrappers, lottery tickets, to also luxury shopping bags. So it's a very eclectic mix. What drew you to these different materials?
Yes, I think it's my recycle practice. Again, it's not to throw away. No, I think it's like there is one side that's kind of a diary, that's like me collecting things. That's part of my life. Gifts I receive from people, from my family, from friends, and traveling, This is a kind of a collection that I always had. And in 2003, I had a show at an institution in France. And then the curator, he said to me, offer me a space to work with in this space. And he said, you can work as a studio. I never really liked to work out of my studio. And so, but I have this collection of wrapper papers from chocolates. And then I said, well, maybe this is the moment for me to stop and think about making collages or something. So that was like a very important moment. The curator, Frédéric Paul, that I developed 8 collages, all based in the colors you could find in chocolate wrappers. And same composition, like a big flower in the center in a kind of a background. And so it was, I call it series because it was aubergine series. And so, and then from that point, I think when I came back to Rio, I wanted to organize a studio just to work with the collages. And of course that evolves. It's something that lives with me. It took me from my childhood. It's a kind of, it's sometimes very difficult to finish a collage, the composition, but it's naturally more joyful, It's like, and at the same time, it's a kind of politically speaking, like how we could, it's the consuming, the exaggeration of taking us so badly to bad places. So like maybe trying to make something good from this, or maybe stopping doing more and more of these kind of materials, that we're throwing away all the time. These specific collages here has one more thing that actually based on the drawings, I start working like with the markers over and make some areas that's like making some papers or work directly on paper without being cut out. But also I ask my mother and I ask Marcos, my assistant for more than 30 years, to make some papers and then cut out it as part of the, a kind of a community working, because collages has this kind of a wonderful environment, to work with. Yeah.
And I think also, we were saying earlier, Maya Shapiro wrote about Matisse that his paintings were guilty of decorative violence, and also thinking about the book, David Batchelor's book, Chromophobia, The Fear of Colour, which ranges from Puritanism to good taste. And I think that this resolute use of street culture, church decorations, sweet wrappers, vivid, unapologetic colour, I find it actually, there is a politics to your work.
Yes.
Beatriz is here, and I'm sure would be happy to speak to you after the event. So.